Good afternoon. I'm Joey Only. Welcome to Caribou Weather Dude channel. Of course, I don't always talk weather. Sometimes I talk Wing Chun. I had a 4 hour long conversation on Sunday night with Seafood John Kaufman once again, and it was amazing and incredible. Last time we began talking, we started talking about the story of Chu Shang Tin and his history and lineage in Wing Chun. Well, today we're going to start with talking to John about his lineage and history and how he became the master he is. Of course, this video proves all legitimacy beyond a doubt as to John, his background, and who he is and what he does. But that wasn't really the point of it necessarily, because John doesn't require that. And those of us who look up to him, we don't require that. The point is that for all of history, this story now exists somewhere, and you can tune in for yourself. If John is a friend of yours, if his story matters to you, if he's one of your teachers, now you can find a whole hour of John telling his story, and I think it's worth looking into if you're a Wing Chun student. And if you're not, it's worth looking into anyways, because, man, the guy tells great stories. All right, here you go. So Joey here talking to Seafood Kaufman over in Hong Kong. It's Sunday night here, but it's not Sunday night there. It's Monday early afternoon, if I'm not mistaken. And
It's 10,
last time...
it's 10:50 a.m. here in Hong Kong.
Okay, there we go. And last time we had this great conversation, and then we put the recordings up, and it seems like a lot of people really benefited from it. So I really benefited from it. So, that was goal number one for me. But, the beauty thing is to share it and see more and more people. So I kind of wanted to get back to that topic, but I wanted to start this time, instead of telling the story of Chu Shan Tin, I'd like to hear, to begin with, the story of John Kaufman, which I know some of, but your Wing Chun journey, or however you wish to tell it.
I was living in Manhattan in New York City. It was 1977, August, September of 1977. And I was starting graduate school at Brooklyn College to get a Master's of Fine Arts in painting. And that was due to begin, and the classes were in the evening. So I needed something to do during the day. And I had never trained in a martial art, but I thought maybe I'd like to try something. So I didn't know anything about it. So I looked in the Yellow Pages, which they still had back then. And I came across an ad in the Yellow Pages for a Wing Chun school. And of course, there were, I'm sure, many other martial arts schools advertising in the Yellow Pages then. I don't know why I chose to go visit this Wing Chun school other than some other school, but I did. And it was a school that was run by Lee Moy San, who was a student in Wing Chun of Moy Yat. Moy Yat was a disciple of Ip Man back in Hong Kong, but had moved to New York City after Ip Man's death in 1972, and started teaching Wing Chun in New York City. Moy Yat did. So I didn't know anything about Wing Chun or its history. I just walked into the school, which was off of Lexington Avenue and 26th Street in Manhattan. And there was one guy there, some white dude named Steve Gorick. And he was the only one there because it was during the day, and most people, I guess, work during the day or go to school during the day. So they would go and train in the evening. But this was during the day when I went to check it out. So I walked in and I said I was interested in this. And so he asked me if I had any questions. And I had no idea. I don't know anything. I mean, I don't even know enough to ask a question, but I figured I better ask something. So I remember saying to him, okay, what's your fighting stance? And there was a chair in the studio, and he walked across the room and he sat in the chair. He was across the room from me, maybe, I don't know, 25 feet away. And he sat down in the chair and he crossed his legs. And he said, well, if you're over there and I'm here, this can be my fighting stance. I said, oh, okay. So then he went to explain to me, you don't have to respond or do anything until someone gets close enough to touch you. And then you would react, you would respond. I don't remember, it's too long ago, what happened next. It doesn't really matter, but he probably, if you were to come at me, so I start to walk toward him and I get close enough and then he moved. He does whatever Wing Chun movie made. And anyway, that was my introduction to Wing Chun, but I liked the guy. Steve is a great guy. He was very good at Wing Chun, was a good teacher and a nice man. So I started, I thought, okay, I'll start taking lessons. I think it was like $30 a month, and you could go every day as long as the school was open. And he was always there during the day. So he was my real teacher back then in this Moyat lineage of Wing Chun, as taught to him by his Sifu and my Sifu, Li Moi San. I remember like the first time I ever started training there, the first day. This was the first day. There was me and this other guy, and that's it. No one else was in the school except for Steve. And he showed us the Pak Da drill, where one partner throws straight punches, and the other does actually Pak Sao, not Pak Da. Pak Da is Pak and hit. The Pak Sao is just boom, 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 boom. Okay? Against successive straight punches. So boom, boom, boom. That's what we were supposed to do. It was the first drill we were taught. And my partner and I were complete novices. This was both of our first day. So what happened was he didn't know how to do it properly. So instead of pocking me, which means slap, where you contact the bridge with a palm like this, right? He was karate chopping my forearm with the side of his hand, like boom, boom. You get it? So I don't know any better, so I don't say anything. So we just keep at it. I mean, we probably were doing it for like at least an hour, maybe more. I remember like going home later and my forearms were killing me and they were all bruised to shit. Because imagine, I'm being karate chopped in the forearm repeatedly instead of slap with a palm. The next day, I go back to the class and my arms were all bruised up and in a lot of pain. So I show it to Steve Gorick and he goes, oh, okay, come over here. And he brings out a bottle of Deep Dat Jiao. You know what Deep Dat Jiao?
No, but it maybe is something like something I get here at Chinatown in Barkerville, historic Barkerville.
Yeah,
which is a red liquid.
Yeah, it's a very commonly used combination of various natural herbs and chemicals that they mix up and they let it sit in jars for over a period of time, and you rub it on to where the bruise is fairly hard, you press, and it brings the blood to the surface, and it takes the jiao liquid and draws it into the muscle, and it's supposed to help treat bruising and so forth. It's a very common ointment that's used in Kung Fu, and various people have various recipes to make it. So it turned out that it helped me a lot. It took the pain away and the bruises faded very quickly. So then, I liked the Wing Chun, and I kept going to the school every day, and I would do what they told me to do, and I would practice the various drills and so forth. And I was learning this way of doing Wing Chun, and I trained there for 2 years. And I liked it a lot. It was good. There was a lot of work on drills. There was, of course, like everybody else, we started learning the Sunam Tao form. So you memorize the form, and it's broken into thirds, 3 sections, and you're taught each section, and you put them together, and you memorize the moves, and you practice the form. So for the 2 years, what my practice and training consisted of was a lot of Sunam Tao work, and a lot of drills, different drills, a lot of Pak Sao and Pak Da drills, and a lot of Lap Sao drills. You know, Lap Sao?
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of that, and Gan Sao and Ganda drills, okay, and drills of that nature. But most of them were Pak Sao, Gan Sao, and Lap Sao drills.
And a lot of
And
Chi Sao.
well, we started doing some Chi Sao. I don't remember how long until they started me on some Chi Sao, but it wasn't all that long. I mean, it wasn't like 6 or 8 months. It was probably, I don't know, a few months, whatever. Start doing rolling hands, you know, Pun Sao, they called it. It's also known as Luk Sao. Just rolling and changing from one position to another as you roll, you know, inside, outside, Fuk Sao, Tan Sao, Bong Sao, right? And then from the rolling, they started to introduce some simple techniques. Like from the rolling, you might go into some Tanda, okay, or even some Lap Da, okay. So some simple Chi Sao, which would incorporate simple drills into your Chi Sao. As you progressed a little bit, not that much, the Chi Sao would incorporate hitting. So the hitting was to the chest. We're not supposed to hit to the head, supposed to hit to the chest. But really hit to the chest. In this school, this is what was stressed. I mean, this is what we were taught. I don't know any better. I just know what I'm being taught. I have no basis for any comparison, but I remember, you know, being taught in Chi Sao, if you can hit, you hit. But because we're fellow students, we don't want to hurt each other. So the strikes have to be to the chest, pretty much to the sternum. So I remember I used to go home all the time with yellow bruises all over my chest from getting hit. And I didn't care. I mean, to me, that's just what we were supposed to do. And of course, one of the ideas being that it would teach you to defend so you don't get hit. And it would teach you to take a hit, at least to the chest, and keep going. So that it had some aspect of a little bit of realism to it. So this is what I was taught Chi Sao was about and how it should be done. So I trained there for 2 years, but then I had graduated from art school and I was applying for jobs teaching in public high school art. And the job I got was on the North Shore of Boston. So I moved away. There was no Wing Chun where I moved to. This was in the fall of 1979 into the end of 1979. And then I didn't like teaching, so I quit. And I moved to the Boston area where my family was from, my parents, my family. And after spending years on my own, living in New York City and then teaching in the North Shore of Boston, I ended up moving back to my parents' house outside of Boston. I was like 26 at the time. So I had started Wing Chun in September of 77. I was 24. And so now I'm living back in my parents' home. I'm 26. And I start a business cleaning houses, a commercial cleaner, you know, and I would print up business cards and put them up in grocery stores and buy a vacuum and cleaning supplies. And women would call me up and say, okay, come clean my house. And I would do that. And I found I enjoyed working for myself, being my own boss. And actually, I was making as much money as I was as a teacher, which of course wasn't very much. But it was okay. And I enjoyed being my own boss and working for myself. So now I'm living closer to Boston, a bigger city. And I thought, oh, well, let me see if there's any Wing Chun here. So I look in to try to find some Wing Chun, and the only ad I could see was a Wing Chun school. So I go to visit it, and the teacher's name was Henry Mui, M-U-I. And he was Chinese. He was from mainland China, but he was living in Boston. And he was teaching Wing Chun It was a non-Ip Man lineage. It was Guolo Wing Chun, which is the village in mainland China that Lung Zhan had retired to from Fosan and taught a modified version of Wing Chun that he had been teaching in Fosan when he returned to his village of Guolo. So it was known as Guolo Wing Chun. And that's how it's known today. But back then, when I started at this school in Boston, they called it Pian Xin Wing Chun, which means side body Wing Chun, because there's a lot of presenting the side of your body and a lot of emphasis on fairly large pivoting when you do your motions. And the knees were very locked in close to each other, extreme pigeon-toed and knees adducted in very close to each other. This is the style that I began to learn in Boston in 1980. And I trained there on and off for 2 years till 82. And it was okay. It is what it is. And then I ended up going to law school starting in September of 82. I had just gotten married and started law school. My wife was in medical school, and so I stopped doing any martial art. I was just busy and was doing other things like many people. I went to law school for 3 years. I graduated. My wife graduated med school. We moved to Western Massachusetts in the Berkshires in Pittsfield, Mass, where she was from, where she grew up, and where she had gotten a position as a resident at the Berkshire Medical Center in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And I started my own law practice in Pittsfield, and she was a resident. A year later, we had our first child. That's what I was doing, and there was no Wing Chun in the Berkshires. Pittsfield was a small town, even though it was the biggest city in the Berkshires, only had like 45,000 people approximately. There was no Wing Chun there. And I was busy with a family and marriage and my law practice, etc. Anyway, years went by. I remember sitting in court one day, browsing through the local, not newspaper, but local, those rags you pick up in grocery stores, with advertisements. Yeah, that kind of thing. And I'm sitting in court just looking at this thing, and I see an ad, a little box ad for Wing Chun Kung Fu in Pittsfield. I went, wow, Wing Chun here? Great. So I thought, I'll do that again. So I went home that night and I called up the guy on the ad, and I introduced myself to him over the phone and said I was interested, and told him a little about my past Wing Chun background, such as it was. And I went to meet him, and he was teaching out of his garage attached to his house in Pittsfield. He probably had about half a dozen students or so, all very nice people. And this man was a very nice man. He was learning at the time from a guy in Albany, New York, which is about an hour away, whose name was and still is Russell Cichon, Cichom, Russell Cichon. Russell was a student of Ip Ching. Ip Ching was Ip Man's second son. Ip Chun was the senior, and Ip Ching was his second son, both of whom lived and taught Wing Chun at the Wing Chun Athletic Association in Hong Kong. But Ip Ching had some students in America and would come through America maybe once a year and make the rounds to his students and put on seminars. And of course, they paid him to do that. So Russell was learning in the Ip Ching lineage. In Ip Ching lineage from Ip Ching, as well as he could, living in America, Ip Ching being in Hong Kong. And my teacher, Bruce, was learning from Russell, okay? But Bruce's background started, and he and I were around the same age, approximately 1996, 95, 96. So I was like 43 or 44, okay? So I had been out of Wing Chun for like 15 years when I got back into it. Bruce's background started when he was a student at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst around the same time I had been in college. So back in the early to mid 70s. And his teacher was a small Chinese man named Arthur Chan, who came from Hong Kong, whose teacher in Hong Kong was Lung Sheng. Lung Sheng was Ip Man's first student in Hong Kong. And Arthur was an engineering graduate student, as I recall, at UMass in Amherst, and started teaching Wing Chun there. And Bruce was a student of his at the University of Massachusetts in Wing Chun. Okay. Took Wing Chun lessons from Arthur at UMass. Turns out that Arthur Chan, you've probably never seen this, but there's a little red book, I actually have it, of the Wooden Man form, which is one of the first books ever published about the Wooden Man form. And it was written by Ip Chun and Ip Ching, okay, the brothers. They were always referred to as the brothers. And it was translated and edited by Arthur Chan. I started training in the Ip Ching system with Bruce. And I liked it a lot. It was a lot of fun. And then after about a year, Bruce came to me one day and he said he didn't want to teach anymore. He was stopping. And he wanted to know if I wanted to take over the school. And I said, yeah, sure. Because I really was enjoying it. And I knew that if I just went back to my own alone, I would be lazy and I would stop practicing. So I thought this would be a good way for me to keep my hand in and keep active doing it. Plus, I enjoyed it. So I started teaching in my basement in my house. And, you know, there were a few, maybe 3 or 4 students that had been at Bruce's school who came with me to continue. I did that for just a few months. I don't remember how long, but not that long. Toward the end of October, around Halloween, this would have been when 1998, that there was the opening of the Wing Chun Museum in Dayton, Ohio, that had been put together by Benny Ming. Benny had been a student of Moyat and had learned from some other Wing Chun people as well. But his main teacher was Moyat. Moyat had told him that Ip Man had always wanted to open some sort of center, you know, that people could go and share their Wing Chun, like a museum or something. So anyway, Benny put together funding and in the town where he lived, Dayton, Ohio, or just outside of Dayton, the museum was scheduled to open up, a grand opening of the museum in the late October of 1998. And I saw a notice about that and I wanted to go. Nobody else from the small town I was living in teaching Wing Chun was interested. It was just me. And I saw in the notifications for this grand opening that there would be people coming from different places to attend the opening of the Wing Chun Museum. And a lot of the, big deal muckety mucks in the Wing Chun world were going to be there. Okay. You know, like Ip Chun and Ip Ching were going to be there, and a guy named Mak Po and Hawkins Chung, who was going to fly out from California. Hawkins Chung had been a student of Ip Man and was Bruce Lee's best friend in Hong Kong. They grew up together. And Chu Shanten was going to be there. It was just, to me, was just another name person that was supposed to be there. I had no idea who he was. And so
unlikely to have Dayton, Ohio. So unlikely.
Yeah, it's because that's where Benny was from and where he was living and teaching Wing Chun. And he opened his school there. And then he decided to open the museum there. And so that's where everybody went. And so I bought a plane ticket and flew out. It was like over a weekend. So what happened was we were supposed to get together at some Chinese restaurant. So I arrive in town and I go to the Chinese restaurant and I'm sitting at some booth. I don't know anybody. I'm nobody. Nobody knows who I am. There's no reason why they should. And I just sitting in a booth and there's a couple of people sitting across from me. They were like students of Benny Ming's, and we're just chatting, like you do, like, oh, how long have you been doing Wing Chun? Who's your teacher? Blah, blah, blah. And this man walks by and he looks and there's a seat next to me. And he goes, anybody sitting there? And I say, no. And he sits down. He's just some big, kind of little bit overweight white dude, kind of older, like me back then, late 40s. And he sits down. So we start introducing ourselves to each other like you would, how long you been doing Wing Chun, where you're from, blah, blah, blah. And he explains that his name is Marty Anderson. He's from Duluth, Minnesota. He hasn't left Duluth in 18 years, not since 1980. And the only reason he came was he wanted to say hello to his old teacher, Chun, who he trained with in Hong Kong from 1970 to 1980. And that when he started in 1970, Ip Man was still alive. So when he went to Hong Kong to train with Chun, having received a letter of introduction from his Wing Chun teacher in Minnesota named Jimmy Chan, who came from Hong Kong and had trained with Chun, that Ip Man was still alive. So Chun went to him and asked his permission if he could teach Marty, because Marty was non-Chinese. And the answer was obviously yes, because Chun agreed to teach Marty. So Marty kept going back to Hong Kong and training there over the 10-year period. Well, anyway, we're sitting in the Chinese restaurant chatting and talking about our backgrounds. And after dinner, it turns out that Marty and I were staying in the same hotel. So on the way back to the hotel, he says, listen, I haven't done any of this in 18 years. You want to come up to my room and do some practice together? I said, sure. And I had, at that point, learned the entire Ip Ching system, both from originally Bruce, but then later from Russell Sechong, and also from who turned out to be one of my best friends named Daniel Leahy, who, as it turned out, had started Wing Chun in Lee Moy Sun School in New York around the same time I had been there. But we didn't know each other because I would go in the day and he would go at night. But then later, he and his family to Vermont, northern Vermont, Middlebury, Vermont. And he became a U.S. postal carrier, a letter carrier. But he continued his Wing Chun practice and became a student of Ip Ching and learned the system under Ip Ching. And he had also learned Chen Tai Chi in New York City before moving to Vermont. He was also sharing me his knowledge of Ip Ching Wing Chun as well. So by the time I met Marty in Ohio, I had learned the entire Ip Ching lineage method of Wing Chun, including the weapons forms, etc. And I thought I was pretty good. So then I go up to Marty's hotel room and he says to me, can I see your cinema tau form? I said, sure. So I did the form for him. Okay. So then he says to me, what's this? Can you see what I'm doing? Yeah, Hyun Sao. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm thinking, I don't say anything, but I'm thinking, this guy doesn't know anything. I mean, everybody knows that it's Hyun Sao, circling hand. He goes, so I say to him, I patiently explain, oh, it's called Hyun Sao. It means circling hand. He goes, oh, what's it for? So now I'm thinking, oh, this guy doesn't know anything. So I patiently explain, well, when energy's coming in, you can redirect it to create an opening to hit through. And he says, oh, okay, do it. So then he takes his hand like this, and he starts moving it toward me very slowly. And as he makes contact with my bridge, I start to Hyun Sao. and I can't move him. So then he stops and he says, well, you see, John, if somebody's moving very slowly, you might be able to do it like that. But if they're using real speed and power, you really got to put something into it. You see? I went, oh, okay. So then he did it to me. And as soon as he just went like that, my whole arm is like dead and my whole body's being jerked. So then he starts to share a few simple things with me that, I realized later on a lot of Chushan people do to help them demonstrate some of the aspects of what they do in their Wing Chun. Just a couple of quick examples. He stood directly facing me and we held each other's forearms like this. Okay. So like this, you see? Yeah. And he said, push me, move me back, push me. So I start to push him and I can't move him. It's like pushing the tree. And then he says, okay, my turn. So I'm ready. And he goes like this, and my whole body goes flying backwards, right? and then another thing he did was, just two more examples from what I can recall that impressed me. He had these focus mitts. Everybody has them, no big deal. Right? You slide your hand in. He held one on his palm like that. Again, we're facing each other. And he says, okay, take your hand, your fist, or your palm, I don't care which, your palm. And bang, hit the focus mitt as hard as you can. While he's holding it, right? So we're facing each other. So my strike is sideways, not straight, okay?
Yeah.
So I go, like that. So I go like that as hard as I can. And it whacks into the mitt, but nothing happens, okay? And then he goes, okay, my turn. So now I hold the mitt and he's got an open palm, about that far away. And he sets himself like this. And he goes, boom, like that. And the fucking mitt flies right out of my hand and right across the room and smacks into the wall like a bullet. Well, oh shit, And then the other thing that impressed me was, again, we stood facing each other. And he asked me to put my hand out like this on the side of his shoulder. And then to exert force sideways into his body through his shoulder, see? To try to tip his body over, to move him. So I go as hard as I can, and I can't move him. Nothing happens. It's like trying to move a mountain. And he does it to me, and immediately, with very little effort, he just tips my whole body over. So these are some of the things he's showing me. And then we start to do a little bit of chi sao. And I thought I was pretty good because I was pretty good at running and hitting and switching positions. And I was pretty fluid. I could, move fast. And against some people, many people, like the people that I would touch hands with at the museum that weekend, I could handle fairly well. And I'm not saying I was great, but I could handle, I could get in my licks, in other words. Okay. And as soon as we started to move, we touch hands. We're going to start to roll. And as soon as we start to do any motion at all of a sudden, my whole body is being yanked around through space like this. At the same time, his hands are going boom, 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 boom in my face without hitting me. I felt like what it was like immediately in my mind was like being eaten up by a buzzsaw. Okay. Just being sucked in and being totally destroyed. There was absolutely nothing I could do. I couldn't try to defend. I couldn't try to apply some technique to deal with his motion. It was just like being eaten up by this incredibly fast buzzsaw. And I had never experienced that in my life before by anybody. I went, oh, wow. I was just totally blown away. And he looked at me, he goes, I haven't done this in 18 years. He goes, if you think I have anything, you should see Chu Shan Tin. Is what he said to me, which years later, I found out for a fact that every top student of Chu Shan Tin would say the same thing. There hasn't been a single exception I've ever become aware of anybody who hadn't said the same thing. No matter how good they were, Chu Shan Tin was much better. So from that moment on, I didn't give a shit about the museum anymore. I just wanted to pick this guy's brain, okay? Because I thought, wow, if Wing Chun can be this is what I want, okay? So I remember the next morning, I couldn't sleep. It was 6 a.m. in the fucking morning. I call him up in his hotel room, wake him up. I go, come on, let's train. So I spent the weekend with him, learning as much as I could. And he was very open and willing to share with me his way of doing Wing Chun. And how to stand, how to move, the ideas and principles behind the Chu Shan Tin method of Wing Chun. As little or as much as I could get in a two-day period. And, we attended the opening of the museum and, participated, blah, blah, blah. But for me, it was all about this guy. So then it's time to leave. We go back to the airport together. He's flying home to Minnesota, and I'm flying back to Albany and then home to Massachusetts. And we're in the airport waiting for our flights. And one of the things that he had been showing me over the weekend was quote unquote footwork of Wing Chun. And it wasn't about where to step with your feet. It was about keeping your mind on your torso and moving your torso through space. And that the feet would stay under you because your mind would not let you fall on your face. So if you move your torso somewhere, your feet stay under you to keep your balance automatically. So when you do quote unquote Wing Chun footwork, according to him, it's not about what you're doing with your feet so much as it is about what you're doing with your torso. Your feet just stay under you because it's not going to let you fall on your face. Okay. So I remember being in the airport with him and practicing this movement, footwork, if you will, or moving the torso around in his way of Wing Chun. So I remember walking down this hallway in the airport, like this, okay? Trying to just move my torso and having my feet stay under me, okay? So I start doing that, and I turn to him, I go, like that? Well, you can't see very well what I was doing, but it was very robotic. And he looks at me, goes, well, yeah, but you look like an idiot. During this so I go back to Russell Sichan, very nice man, who, as I said, I had been learning the Ip Ching method from. So after that weekend, I go right back. I drive to Albany, an hour away, and I go see Russell at his school. And I explained to him my experience over the weekend was, and then I met this guy named Marty, blah, 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 blah. And I start telling him about all this. And I talked to him for like, I don't know, an hour or two. And he's patiently listening. And at the end of that, he says, that's really interesting, John. But unfortunately, I'm not free to learn a different way. And I said, I didn't mean that you should. I just was excited about the weekend and I thought I would share it with you. That's all. He goes, sure, I appreciate it. Yeah. So he says, yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing it with me. But, he was a certified Sifu by Ip Ching. and had a certificate from the Wing Chun Athletic Association signed by Wang Xianglong hanging on his wall. And he's been teaching for a number of years at that point, and I'm sure he felt that he was invested in that lineage, and that's fine. It's none of my business. And that's what he was going to continue with. And again, that's fine. It's none of my concern. It's none of my business. And I wasn't suggesting that he should do otherwise. I was just excited about the experience I had. So I said, oh, yeah, sure, no problem. Thanks for listening to me. And that was that. And I went away. And I never went back to learn from him anymore, because my own personal decision was that if I could, I wanted to try to learn this other way of doing Wing Chun, the Chu Shan Tin methods. So I would do the best I could to practice in what Marty had shared with me over the next year. I incorporated in my teaching because I continued to teach. And I would talk to Marty a lot over the phone. And so I did the best I could in that vein over the next year. In the fall of 1999, so 1 year later, there was the first Wing Chun World Conference to be held in Hong Kong in November of 99. And I wanted to go. And I called up Marty and said, hey, come on, will you go with me to Hong Kong for the World Conference, first World Wing Chun Conference? And he goes, I can't afford it, John. And he wasn't really interested anyway. And I said, come on, man, I'll pay for you. Because I was a lawyer and I had money and it wasn't that much for me. And I wanted him to come with me because he had lived in Hong Kong, and it would be nice for me to go with him and I could learn more from him. And also, he knew people in Hong Kong, etc. I thought it'd be great fun. And he says he couldn't afford it. I said, well, I'll pay for you. And he goes, no, that wouldn't be right. He says, but I do have some antiques that I brought back with me when I left Hong Kong. So if you don't have to, but if you want to buy some from me, maybe that would pay for the trip. I said, sure, let me do that. So that's what I did. Okay. So we ended up going to Hong Kong together. We shared a hotel room in Chim Sa Choi in Kowloon, Hong Kong, at the YMCA, and which is actually a very good hotel in Kowloon, and a great location. And so, for those 2 weeks in Hong Kong with Marty, I could learn a lot more from living with him. And also Marty, as a former student of Chu Shan Tin, could get me into training there at Chu Shan Tin School. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
And also in making the arrangements to go to Hong Kong for the conference, I had contacted the man who was organizing the whole thing internationally. His name is Buick Yip. Turns out now to be a really good friend of mine. I've known him again since 1999. So we've known each other for 23 years, Buick and I. And Buick had been a student of Chu Shan Tin for decades. But also back in the 70s, Buick had moved from Hong Kong to New York City and ended up being a student of Li Moi San in New York, which was my first Wing Chun school there. So when I made the connection to Buick to make arrangements to attend the conference, and he realized my background, he goes, oh, let's get together when you come to Hong Kong. So I had an in to Chu Shan Tin School, both from Marty and also from Buick. So that's when I started going to Chu Shan Tin School to train. And it was great 2 weeks. It was a lot of fun. It was fun to go to the conference and be part of all of that. And then I think it was the second week of the conference. Everybody was going to go to mainland China on this tour. We'd go to Shunda and Foshan and participate in some group get-togethers with some Foshan Wing Chun people, etc. And so I went. And Marty didn't go. He didn't want to go. So he stayed back in Hong Kong, when I went to mainland China with everybody else to go on this tour, this Wing Chun tour. And that was great fun. It was really my first time in mainland China, and it was exciting. And, it was really great fun, and met a lot of good people. We're traveling together on the buses and eating banquet style together for lunch and dinners. And I met a lot of really interesting Wing Chun people from different lineages, including Chu Shantin people and including Wang Shenglong people. At one day during lunch, you get like 12 people around a round table, and there's different tables. It's a banquet style. That's how they fed us. And there was always pretty much the same group of people at each table. So I'm sitting with a bunch of people, and one guy name was Tony Barcados, who was this huge, gigantic man from Australia. I mean, he was maybe 6'2", I'm guessing, but he was really big. I mean, just to be polite, I won't say fat, but fat. Okay. I mean, the guy looked like a fucking buffalo. Okay. And then he one of his good friends was with him all the time at the table. His name was Bill Dowding, Dowding. Tony Barcados was a student of Jim Fung, who was a student of Chu Shantin. Jim Fung had opened schools and was very successful teaching Wing Chun all over Australia and New Zealand too, a little bit. But Bill Dowding was a student of Barry Lee from Australia. And Barry Lee was a disciple and actually brother-in-law of Wang Shenglong. He married Wang Shenglong's sister. Barry Lee was, I think he's German. He was Guaylo. But he lived in Hong Kong for years and trained with Wang Shenglong and became very close and married Wang Shenglong's sister, and then went to Australia to teach. And Bill Dowding was one of his students. So we're sitting there, and I'm meeting all these people. Samuel Kwok comes over. You know who he is?
Yeah.
Okay, so he was a student of Ip Chan, and then Ip Ching started off with a student of, I think, Lee Sing in London, but then later learned from Ip Chun and Ip Ching, and that was kind of Sam's claim to fame, and was teaching in England. And he and many of the students were there for this conference and on this trip to China. And so he came over to our table. He was making the rounds of all the tables. And he explained to us that, we were going to go to Chun, to Foshan rather. And there was going to be some demonstrations that night of Wing Chun. And does anybody want to do some Chi-Sao, demonstrate some Chi-Sao? So somebody asked, well, are we going to do demonstrations with the Wing Chun people from Foshan? And he said, no, just amongst ourselves, because we don't want to have any undue competition or bad feeling or anything. So fine. So I'm just sitting there, minding my own fucking business. And Bill Dowding looks at me, he goes, do you want to do some Chi-Sao demonstration tonight? And I go, okay. I say, okay. But I'm thinking to myself, what the fuck have I got myself into, right? So I go that night, and there's, big room full of people, and there's like this ring, or, like a boxing ring thing, and different people are getting up and doing demonstrations and different, whatever it is they want to do, the forms, Chi-Sao, whatever. And toward the end of it, it's our turn. So Bill and I get up there and we start to do some Chi-Sao, and we do what we do. And I'm just telling you my own personal opinion. I thought we were both pretty bad. Okay. Let me just put it this way. I don't want to denigrate Bill Dowding. I'm just saying that back then, in my opinion, I wasn't impressed with either one of us. Okay. With our performance. Okay. But that was that. So that was over with. And that was the end of the demonstrations. And just as a brief aside, as it turns out, people videotape these demonstrations, and they videotape, like the whole conference and stuff like that. And they put out like a 2-set DVD of the conference, which included this night of demonstrations. And actually, my and Bill's Chisao together are one of the last things on the second DVD. So I've actually been recorded doing this. I don't even think I even have these things anymore. And if I did, which I might, but I can't play it because my computer doesn't take DVDs. Probably no computer does anymore, right? People don't use DVDs anymore, do they? But
well, you could play it on like a Sony PlayStation or something, or
yeah, I don't have any of that stuff. I never have. So anyway, so I'm actually on this thing, which is kind of neat historically, I think. But anyway, so then after all of this demonstrations that same evening, I look over and I see this wooden man against the wall over in the corner. It's a big room, big area. It looks like the wooden man that I had bought through my friend Dan Leahy, which had come from Fosan. So I go over to look at it, and I start playing the form, the wooden man form, by myself. And I go through the form, and when I finish, I hear some applause. And I look over, and there's these Chinese people. Turns out they are Wing Chun people from Fosan, and they are clapping at me having done the form. So I'm happy and I'm smiling, and thank you. And
that didn't make the DVD, eh?
yeah, it did not, right? And then, but this is why I'm telling you this. So one of them, this Chinese guy, Wing Chun guy from Fosan, he starts going like this to me. So we all know what that means, right? He wants the Chisao. I go, oh, okay. Now, we weren't supposed to have any interaction with the people from Fosan, but hey, it's not in front of anybody. It's just him and me and a few other people standing around. So we start the Chisao, and we had great fun together. It was fun. It wasn't competitive. It wasn't aggressive. It was just good fun. So then everybody starts doing it. And throughout the whole room now, everybody's sharing together. Okay. And and everybody had a blast. It was like the best part of the whole evening, right? That was my trip first trip to Hong Kong. So I go home afterwards. I continue to teach as best as I can, having been exposed, such as it was, to the Chushantin method from going to his home to learn. That's where he taught. He taught at his home back then. Each evening, and from being with Marty, etc. I also met a guy named Joe Moy, M-U-I, Moy Chung-Chi, who had been one of Chushantin's top students back in the 60s in Hong Kong. And at that point, back when Marty was learning in the 70s, Joe had his own school on Hong Kong side and helped train Marty. And Joe and Marty became close. And so when Marty and I went to Hong Kong 19 years later in 99, Marty looked up Joe in the phone book and we all got together. And so that's how I met Joe Moy. And anyway, I continued to trade as best I could and teach as best I could in this lineage. And I've never met Marty again in person, not since 99. We're still friends. I'm still close with him. I talk to him sometimes, especially when I go back to the States in New York. He always asks me to call him because he likes to talk about this stuff, which is painfully obvious. I do too, right? And so I would call Marty up and we would have these long conversations. And every time to this day, when I would talk to Marty, it's been very instructive, very helpful to me. Okay. I don't know very many people. I know some, but not a hell of a lot of people who have as much depth of knowledge about the Chushantin method of Wing Chun to share as Marty does. And anybody who's ever trained with Marty, even informally, would tell you the same thing. So I have been learning and practicing and teaching in this method of Wing Chun since 98. and especially since 99 after going to Hong Kong, etc. After 99, I would return to Hong Kong once a year. Sometimes I'd miss a year, but pretty much every year over the next 10 years or so for 2 weeks to enjoy the city. I loved Hong Kong. I loved being a tourist there, but I would go back and train at Chu Shan Tin School. And I met his students, and I would learn from them and from him as much as I could during that 2-week period. Then I'd go home and continue to practice and teach. And another year or two would go by and I'd do the same thing. And I thought I was getting good. And every time I would come back for one of these trips and incorporate this knowledge, my practice and teaching, and a year or two would go by and I think I'm getting pretty good. And I'd go back to Hong Kong and I would start touching hands with the people at his school. And I would realize right away I was no fucking good at all. Okay. Of course, it's a big disappointment and it's very frustrating. And at the end of the day, basically, I would be forced to be faced with the conclusion that I was just nowhere near as relaxed as they were telling me I needed to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, you can't hide the fact that after 5 minutes of Chisai, your shoulders are getting worn out, you know, and you're having a hard time dealing with people who are smaller than you are, but more powerful than you are. Okay. Not everybody, but certainly enough people that it would hit home immediately that, gee, I guess I'm not as good as I thought I was at doing stuff this way. And that's just the way it would continue. I decided to spend more time in Hong Kong than the 2 weeks a year. And I took like what turned out to be 5 months off for my law practice. And I went and lived in Hong Kong for 5 months. And at the time, I had a bad left knee. It hurt a lot. It didn't matter back at home because I drove everywhere. In Hong Kong, I walked everywhere.
Yeah,
And and my leg was fucking killing me, okay, all the time. And so I went back after I got there right away. I went back to Chu Shan Tin School, started training there again. But he had just changed his method of teaching to doing nothing with his students other than zamzong, you know, post-standing practice. Nothing else. So I was following along, just standing there. And I couldn't stand there like that for more than like 3 or 4 minutes without my knee killing me. And I would have to stop and bend down and rub my knee or sit down and rub it. And I would try to do this. Everybody else is just standing there for like an hour, 2 hours, you know, taking breaks, but basically, you know, during the 5-6 hour class. And that's what they're doing. That's their sole practice because Chu Shan Tin had decided to incorporate this method and nothing else to try to develop his students' ability to raise up energy through the spine, etc. Because he had determined that that was the basis for his abilities. And he wanted to try to help his students develop it as well. So I couldn't do it. I knew that Sifu Ma Ki Fai, one of Chu Shan Tin's top students, was teaching. He was still training at Chu Shan Tin's himself, but he was also teaching 3 afternoons a week at the Wing Chun Athletic Association, the BTAA, in Kowloon, which is where a select number of Sifus were allowed to teach on a scheduled basis. And Chu Shan Tin, being very important and influential in the Wing Chun Athletic Association, had previously made arrangements for Ma Ki Fai to be allowed to teach there. So I started going to train with Ma Ki Fai at the BTAA instead of Chu Shan Tin School because 2 reasons. One, to train at Chu Shan Tin School, I would have had to pay about $500 a month, which I could have, but I thought to myself, with the only thing that I'd be doing for that 5 months was standing every night, which I couldn't do because of my knee. So what would I really get out of it? I wasn't skeptical that the standing work couldn't be beneficial, but I didn't think that in 5 months I'd get a lot out of it, especially with my bad knee. So I knew that at Sifu Ma's classes, I could do whatever I wanted. I could work on the forms, chisao with people. It was more like the typical Wing Chun school in the sense that people come in, they train whatever they want to train together. They practice their forms, they practice chisao. If they want to do drills, they can do that. If they want help, they can ask Sifu Ma, and he will work with you, or other people will work with you. It's informal. But I could do everything there, which I used to be able to do at Chu Shantin's, but I couldn't anymore because he changed the way he was teaching. I go to Sifu Ma's class, and like my knee's still killing me. And I start chisaing with a guy named Alex Mann, who was always there, who had been a longtime student of Chu Shantin, but didn't train at Chu Shantin's school anymore for various reasons, which, because this is being recorded, I don't really want to get into right now. But Alex was always at Sifu Ma's classes and would like to participate with anyone who was there. So I did a lot of chisao with Alex. So like one of the first days I'm ever there, I'm chisaing with Alex and my knee's killing me. And he says to me, well, maybe you should try this device where they have electric current that runs through the muscles or something. And maybe you could ask Sifu Ma where you could buy one of these things. So I go up to Sifu Ma and I explain to him what Alex told me, and asking him if he knows where I could buy one of these things, maybe at Fortress, that sold electronic goods, the name of a store here in Hong Kong. And Sifu Ma looks at me, goes, so you have a bad knee? And I went, yeah. And he goes, go see that guy. And he points at some Chinese man across the room, whose name is Wang. Give me a second, I'm bad with names. I forget his first name. But his Chinese name is Su Kyung Wang. Su Kyung actually means cockroach. I know this because one of my best friends in Hong Kong is named Su Kyung Wang, but it's a different guy. Okay. Anyway, so I go to see this Mr. Wang, and it turns out he is a master, like, bone setter. He has a practice in Macau. Okay, he's a trained and practiced bone setter and can manipulate joints and so forth. So I tell him that Sifu Ma suggested I talk to him about my knee, and he sits me down in a chair and he asks me to relax. And then he manipulates my knee. And then he asks me to stand up and test it. And all of a sudden it's like 100% better. And I went, holy shit, right? And like the next day I go back to the class and he's there again and he does it again. He gives me a very quick manipulation. And whereas before, when I would put weight on the knee, it would feel like weak, like it would bend back the wrong way, the joint.
Yep.
Now it just felt normal. And so from that moment on, I was all better. And all these years later, I've never had the problem again. So that would have allowed me, of course, to go back to Chu Shantin's school because my knee was better now. And I could have done more of the standing work, etc. But I decided not to because I liked training at Sifu Ma's school and I liked him. So from then on, and this is back in the beginning of 2008. So what's it been? 14 years. Sifu Ma has been my teacher. And years later, about 12 years ago or so, he left the VTAA place to teach and opened his own school in Kowloon, which is where he still teaches, because he could have his school open every night, every day. Whereas at the VTA, he can only teach 3 afternoons a week. And at the VTAA, they don't allow you to open a school outside the VTAA. And if you do, you can't teach there anymore. So he decided to open his school elsewhere, and that's what he did. So he's still my teacher. And whenever I have anything that I want to check with him or learn, I'll go back and see him. And every time I do, he's very helpful to me. And even after the last time we spoke and you made all those videos just a few weeks ago, After that, I went back to see Sifu Ma. And that, spending even just a half an hour with him, I walk away with like my eyes open, even after all these years, and all excited about, what I'm doing now. So I do have some interesting, what I think anyway, is good stuff to share with you, which is subsequent to what we shared the last time we spoke at length, which is not, I have to say, is not, in my view, at all different or new or somehow more advanced than what we talked about together. It's just maybe a different way of describing or thinking about it, or more importantly, practicing it. Okay. Which is all that really counts when push comes to shove. Developing real skill, not just a quote higher understanding of it, which is kind of valueless unless it's accompanied by skill, unless all you're going to do is talk about it or write a book about it,
Yeah.
But my interest has never been that. My interest has only been in developing my own skill and helping other people to develop theirs if I can. So when I spend time with someone like Sifu Ma, the excitement to me is, Jesus, I'm better now than I was when I walked in here today. Okay. To me, that's what's important, because the truth is the content of his teaching never changes. It's just the students' understanding of it and more importantly, being able to put it into use and practice. Okay. So that's my Wing Chun background. I do the best I can to practice through Ma Ki Fai and the Chu Shan Tin method of Wing Chun. And that's what I teach.